Los Angeles, 1985. A city known for its glitz and glamour was shrouded in terror. The streets, once alive with nightlife, fell silent. Windows were locked tight, doors were bolted shut. The warm California air carried a chill of fear. Something sinister lurked in the shadows. They called him the Night Stalker, a name that sent shivers down spines and made hearts race. He struck without warning, leaving a trail of brutality in his wake. No one was safe. Not in their homes, not in their beds. The monster could be anywhere, waiting, watching. Los Angeles held its breath, wondering who would be next. Richard Ramirez wasn't born evil. He entered the world on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas, a leap year baby. But there was nothing special about his childhood. It was marred by violence and neglect. His father, a former policeman, had a volatile temper. Young Richard often bore the brunt of his rage. Richard Ramirez. As a teenager, I fell under the influence of my older cousin Miguel. Miguel was a Green Beret, fresh from the horrors of Vietnam. He regaled me with gruesome war stories, showed me photos of women he claimed to have raped and killed. These tales didn't repulse me, they fascinated me, awakened something dark within me. By his early 20s, Ramirez had drifted to Los Angeles. The first attack came on June 28, 1984. Jenny Vincow, a 79-year-old woman, was found brutally murdered in her home. Her throat had been slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. The savagery of the crime shocked even hardened detectives. But it was just the beginning. Ramirez's attacks escalated quickly. He struck at random, leaving no pattern for police to follow. Sometimes he used a gun, other times a knife or a hammer. His victims ranged from young children to elderly couples. No one was safe from his rampage. Each crime scene was more horrific than the last. He tortured, raped, and forced some victims to swear to Satan. Each attack, the Night Stalker's notoriety grew. As summer wore on, the attacks became more frequent, more brazen. Ramirez seemed to revel in the panic he was causing. He'd leave windows open, curtains billowing in the night breeze, a taunting message to the police, "Catch me if you can." The city was his playground, and he was always one step ahead. Police officer, July 20th, 1985. A sweltering night in Glendale. Joyce Lucille Nelson, 61, was sound asleep when Ramirez broke in. He beat her to death with his bare hands. Hours later, he attacked again. This time he shot a couple in their home. The husband died instantly. The wife survived to tell the tale, but her description was vague. A tall, long-haired man with bad teeth. It wasn't much to go on. August brought no respite. On the 6th, Ramirez struck twice in one night, first in Northridge, then in Diamond Bar. The attacks were 30 miles apart. August 17th, 1985, a date etched in blood in the annals of California crime. Ramirez outdid himself in a frenzy of violence. He attacked 4 different locations in a single night. From Sun Valley to Mission Viejo, he left a trail of carnage that shocked even the most hardened investigators. Police officer, his first stop was the home of Peter and Barbara Pan in Lake Merced. Peter was shot in his sleep. Barbara was beaten and shot. Both survived, but their lives were forever shattered. Next, he broke into the home of Bill Carnes and his fiancée, Inez Erickson, in Mission Viejo. Carnes was shot in the head 3 times. Erickson was raped repeatedly. Miraculously, both survived. In his haste to escape from the Erickson home, Ramirez made a crucial mistake. He left behind a footprint from his Avia sneakers. With a clear description and physical evidence, the investigation kicked into high gear. The police now had something concrete to work with. They released a sketch of the suspect to the public. Suddenly, the faceless terror had features. Dark eyes, long, stringy hair, rotting teeth. The Night Stalker was no longer just a shadow. Journalists, the media, played a crucial role. They plastered Ramirez's face on every newspaper, every TV screen. His image was inescapable. The public was both terrified and galvanized. Neighborhood watch groups sprang up overnight. People looked at strangers with suspicion. Every dark-haired man was a potential suspect. As the hunt for Ramirez intensified, so did public paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. The sound of footsteps behind you on a dark street was enough to make your heart race. People changed their routines, their habits. Nightlife in Los Angeles all but died. Victims' family member hardware stores couldn't keep up with the demand for locks, bars, and security systems. Gun sales skyrocketed. Even in the sweltering summer heat, windows remained firmly shut. The fear was palpable, a living thing that seemed to hang in the air like smog. But with the fear came a new sense of community. Neighbors who had never spoken before now kept watch over each other's homes. People walked in groups, safety in numbers. The Night Stalker had inadvertently brought people together, united against a common enemy. The media fueled both the paranoia and the vigilance. August 30th, 1985, a day that would go down in history. Ramirez, unaware that his face was plastered across every newspaper in California, took a bus to visit his brother in Tucson. When he returned to Los Angeles, he was shocked to see his image everywhere. Panic set in. He tried to steal a car, but the owners noticed and raised the alarm. Ramirez fled on foot, running through the streets of East LA. Police officer, a group of residents recognizing him from the news, gave chase. The hunter had become the hunted. For miles, Ramirez ran. His pursuers grew in number. Mothers pushing strollers pointed him out. Shopkeepers joined the chase. It was as if the entire neighborhood had risen up against him. Finally, exhausted and cornered, Ramirez was caught. The trial of Richard Ramirez began on July 22, 1988. It would become one of the most expensive and lengthy criminal trials in California history. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with survivors, families of victims, and a morbidly curious public. Ramirez seemed to revel in the attention, often smiling and making satanic gestures. The evidence against him was overwhelming: fingerprints, DNA, eyewitness accounts. The prosecution painted a picture of a monster, a sadistic killer who took pleasure in the suffering of others. Victim's family member. Survivors gave heart-wrenching testimony, reliving their nightmares in excruciating detail. Ramirez's defense team tried to argue insanity, claiming his actions were the result of drug-induced psychosis, but the jury wasn't buying it. On September 20th, 1989, after deliberating for 22 days, they found Ramirez guilty on all counts. 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. When the judge sentenced him to death, Ramirez remained defiant. For the victims and their families, the verdict brought a measure of closure. The capture and conviction of Richard Ramirez brought relief, but it couldn't erase the trauma. For those who survived his attacks, life would never be the same. Many struggled with PTSD, unable to feel safe even in their own homes. The sound of a creaking floorboard or a shadow on the wall could trigger panic attacks. Victims' family member. Families of the victims grappled with overwhelming grief and anger. How do you make sense of such senseless violence? How do you move on when a loved one has been taken in such a brutal manner? Support groups formed, offering a place for survivors and families to share their pain, their fears, their hopes for healing. The impact rippled out beyond those directly affected. An entire generation of Californians grew up in the shadow of the Night Stalker. Children who had been taught to fear the dark, to mistrust strangers, carried those lessons into adulthood. The carefree spirit of Southern California had been tarnished, perhaps permanently. Richard Ramirez died of natural causes on June 7, 2013, while awaiting execution on death row. His passing barely made a ripple compared to the tidal wave of fear he had once caused. But the legacy of the Night Stalker lives on, a dark chapter in California's history that continues to fascinate and horrify. The case changed law enforcement practices. It highlighted the importance of interagency cooperation, of sharing information across jurisdictions. It led to advancements in forensic techniques and the use of DNA evidence. The lessons learned during the hunt for Ramirez have helped catch countless other criminals in the years since. Journalist. For true crime enthusiasts, the Night Stalker case remains a subject of morbid fascination. Books, documentaries, even a Netflix series have explored the terror of those months in 1985. They serve as a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind a human face. and the devastation one person can cause. But perhaps the most lasting legacy is in the resilience of the human spirit, the way communities came together in the face of terror, the courage of survivors who refused to be silenced, the dedication of law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to bring a killer to justice.